and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Addy's surprise. Chapter 4, The Cost of Freedom. When Addy arrived at the pier the next Saturday, Reverend Drake was already handing out old clothes and blankets to the people who had just gotten off the boat. Sarah and her mother were there, just as they had been when Addy and Mama arrived in Philadelphia last summer. Addy was glad to see them. "What am I supposed to say to these folks?" Addy asked Sarah. "You ain't got to say nothing special," Sarah said. "Just be yourself." "I wish I could be like you," Addy said. "When you made us, you made me feel like I was coming home." "I was scared the day I met you," Sarah admitted. "And look how good things turned out for us." The pier was slick with mud. Garbage floated in the dark, icy water, and the newly freed people huddled together in silent groups. They looked cold, frightened, hungry, and lost. Addy closed her eyes for a second. "Esther, Sam, Papa, be here, be here," Addy wished, but when she opened her eyes, there were no familiar faces in the crowd. Addy's heart sank. Just then she saw a thin woman who held a bundle in her arms. Addy heard a sharp cry. For a second, Addy thought it was Esther crying, and her heart started to pound. Then she saw a little hand reach up from the bundle. Quickly, Addy pulled her shawl from around her shoulders and handed it to the woman, who thanked her and wrapped the shawl around her baby. Addy held out her arms. "I can carry the baby if you like," she said. "I'll be careful." The woman said weakly, "Thank you kindly," she said. She handed the baby to Addy. Addy cradled the baby in her arms just as she used to cradle Esther. The baby's eyes were bright as buttons. Addy held the baby close to her chest, hoping to warm her. The baby waved her arms and grabbed the cowrie shell Addy wore around her neck. The baby's mother smiled. "She likes you," she said. "She don't take a shine to just anybody." The woman rode back to the church in the wagon that Reverend Drake had brought along with an old man who was coughing so hard his whole body shook. Another man in the wagon had been limping along with a stick he had used as a crutch. His foot was bandaged with dirty rags. Addy looked at the poor, tired people plodded along behind the wagon. Some had no shoes. Others wore tattered clothes. Addy held the baby closer to her, trying to keep her warm. "Where y'all from?" Addy asked the baby's mother. "We coming up from Baltimore," said the woman. "All the slaves from our plantation was turned out about a month ago. We was told we was free and we had to get, but we ain't had nowhere to go. No food, no nothing. Me and some others walked together. For a week, we ate almost nothing but grass." "We walked until we got to Baltimore." Things gonna be better here," promised Addy. "The people at the church helped me and my mama. They'll help you too." When the wagon arrived back at church, Addy led the woman to Fellowship Hall in the basement. The big room was warm and dry and filled with the smell of delicious food. Many church members were there to help serve food to the Freedmen. Addy remembered how happy she and Mama had been in the same place, eating their first warm meal on freedom on their first day in Philadelphia. She said goodbye to the woman. "You be safe now," she said. "People in the church are going to be your family." Addy hugged the baby one last time. Memories of Esther filled her mind, and she squeezed her eyes tight to stop the tears. Then she let go to Mrs. Ford's. Back at the shop, there were more errands to do and 3 deliveries to make. Addy hurried along the busy street. She saw women in fancy hats and fur coats and carrying packages wrapped up in bright paper. Usually, Addy would have been fascinated with their fine clothes and fancy manners, but today they seemed silly. She remembered the people shivering at the pier. A man in a top hat strolled by, swinging a fine walking stick. Addy thought of the man at the pier with his foot in dirty bandages. When Addy made a delivery to one of the most biggest houses on Society Hill, all she could think of them, the freedmen who had arrived that morning. None of them had a place to stay at all. Addy got tips from the first 2 houses she went to. The coins jingled in her mitten, and she began to think carefully about the scarf that she would soon be able to buy for Mama. She got a 5-cent tip from the last delivery. She would just have just enough for the scarf. Addy began to walk faster. Her last delivery was for a beautiful plaid dress for Isabella Howell. It was the dress Mama had worked hardest on, and Addy was very proud to be delivering it. She left the shiny brass knocker on the door 3 times and banged it loudly for 3 times. Soon a woman came. "Who are you?" she asked coldly. I'm Addy Walker. Here is a dress from Mrs. Ford's dress shop. It's for Isabella Howell." "Very well, then," said the maid as she took the package. "Wait here." Addy stood in the entrance of the Howell's mansion. The house looked even more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. A staircase of dark wood curved up on the 2nd floor. Addy could see into the living room. She could see high-packed pink couches and pink chairs. Instead of kerosene lamps, the room had gas lamps, each one lighted and covered by a glass globe. In the corner, a decorated Christmas tree reached up to the ceiling. The lamplight filled with a rosy glow, and a fire burned on the hearth. Maid turned slowly and pressed a coin into Addy's hand. "Here's a tip for you, child. Now run along," she said, hurrying Addy out the door. Addy was outside the big door she had closed behind her. She looked at the coin in her hand. She couldn't believe what she saw. "A dime!" said Addy out loud. "A whole dime!" It was the biggest tip Addy had ever gotten. She slid into her mitten. Now she had enough for Mama's scarf. She even had a little extra to put in the milk bottle to start saving for the lamp again. Addy skipped down the walk and ran all the way back to the shop. She didn't even stop in to see Mama and Mrs. Ford. Instead, she ran upstairs and took her kerchief out from under the mattress. She untied the knot and let the coins fall on the table. She turned her mitten upside down and dumped the tips she had made that day into the pile of money. Carefully, she counted the 20 cents for Mama's scarf. Then she dropped the rest of the money in the milk bottle. The 20 cents went into the mitten. She would get the scarf this afternoon after she finished her errand. She could hardly wait. Addy's last chore of the day was to get Mrs. Ford's scissors sharpened. The sharpener's spot was not too far from Mr. Del Monte's shop. If Addy hurried, she could get the scissors sharpened and buy the scarf before it got dark. The grinding of the wheel that sharpened the scissors made a loud whining noise, so Addy waited outside. People pushed her in a hurry to get home. Streetcars changed and carriages rushed by, but she hardly noticed them. All could she think about was how Mama's beautiful scarf and how surprised she would be Christmas morning. A woman pushing a fancy baby buggy wheeled toward Addy and stopped in front of the shop. The buggy was too big to fit in the door, so the woman parked next to Addy lifted out a little baby all bundled in soft, fleecy blankets. The baby started to fuss. Suddenly, Addy remembered the baby she held this morning. Then she began to think about Esther. My sister might not be as lucky as that baby at the pier. Who's going to give her money to come to Freedom? Addy felt the coin she held in her hands inside the mitten. It was only 20 cents, but if everyone gave as much as possible, then all the newly freed people could come north, maybe even Esther. Addy stood quietly by herself for a minute, her heart aching with the memory of her baby sister. Then she turned and went and picked up the scissors. Addy headed to Mr. Del Monte's store. It was still open. She could still see the pretty red scarf tucked behind the tea kettle in the window, but Addy didn't go inside. Instead, she walked down the street for a few more blocks until she came to the church. With both hands, she pulled open the heavy door. She walked over to the box at the side of the church. Above it was a sign that said Freedman's Fund. Slowly, Addy took off her mitten. One by one, she dropped her coins in the box. The last coin was the half-dime Uncle Solomon had given her. She remembered the words he said to her, "Freedom's got a cost." Then she thought of Esther, Sam, and Papa still waiting to take their freedom, and she let the half-dime clink into the box with the rest of her money. When Addy got back to the shop, she could see Mama and Mrs. Ford through the window. They were sitting next to the stove with their hands bent over their sewing. Addy knew they were working on their last dresses when they had done before Christmas. Both women looked up when Addy came through the door. "There won't be any more deliveries today," said Mrs. Ford. "You run along now, Addy," said Mama. I'll be up soon to start supper." As Addy started to leave, Mrs. Ford spoke again. "There's no sense in you going upstairs. Stay here with me and your mother." Addy turned around and looked at Mrs. Ford and then at Mama. She couldn't believe her ears. "Did Mrs. Ford say she could stay in the shop?" Mama said, "Addy will be upstairs, Mrs. Ford. I know you run a business here and you don't want children in the shop." "I know I've said that in the past," Mrs. Ford said to Mama, "but I believe Addy has served my business well, and I don't think she'll be in the way." Addy stood at the door with her back against the knob. She looked at Mama, who looked puzzled. Addy was puzzled too. She had no idea what Mrs. Ford was up to. "Take this," Mrs. Ford said to Addy. She handed Addy a needle book with 2 shining needles inside. "While your mother and I are working, you can keep yourself busy. I know your mother taught you to hem. This is a plain apron you can practice on." "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Ford," Addy said. "There's no need to thank me," Mrs. Ford said as she went back to her sewing. "Come sit on this crate by me," Mama said. "I'll keep an eye on your stitches." Addy sat down next to Mama and spread the white apron across her lap. Then she smoothed it out and then threaded the needle and knotted it tight. She picked up the corner of the apron and started to sew the new hem. Carefully and slowly, Addy went about her task. She concentrated hard on her stitches, making them even and straight. Addy was glad to have a job to do. It helped her mind get her mind off the scar. But more than anything, she was glad to be with Mama. That's the end of that chapter. See you later.